Hello humans, I am the Black Cat and welcome to Weird Wednesday. This week we look at the strange case of Gef the Talking Mongoose.
My name is Gef.
So this story takes us back to the early 1930s in a little village called Dalby on the Isle of Man. The Irving family claimed to have had a talking mongoose named Gef living with them. James Irving, his wife Margaret, and their teenage daughter Valerie lived on a farm in a small two-storied, two-bedroom house. The interior walls had been panelled with wood, leaving a gap of a few inches, enough space for a small animal to go in. James said that the animal that was similar in appearance to a weasel with a small body, long bushy tail, flat nose, and yellow in colour, was first spotted around the farm, but soon moved into the walls of the house. James went on to say that this eerie weasel then began to keep us awake at night by blowing, spitting, and growling behind the matchboard partition of the lower rooms. The creature first started mimicking animal noises, then started singing nursery rhymes, until it had built up its vocabulary enough to converse with the family. The creature spoke in a high-pitched voice. When asked who or what the creature was, it apparently replied with,
"I am the ghost of a weasel, and I will haunt you with weird noises and clanking chains,"
but later referred to himself as
just a little extra clever mongoose.
Gef claimed to have been born in New Delhi, India in 1852. When a journalist from the Manchester Daily Dispatch asked James about it, he said, "In October, I and my daughter caught the first glimpse of the beast. It was a little animal resembling a stoat, a ferret, or a weasel. Yellow in colour, with a body about 9 inches long. Its long bushy tail is speckled with black. It is thin and could get through a very small hole. It appears in the house from time to time, and I made attempts to catch Jack. In about November, we first heard a strange voice coming from behind the woodwork, singing sentences of songs and hymns." James also claimed that the animal could shapeshift and become invisible. He talked about one incident when a couple of fishermen came to his farm and sat down to have a chat. Apparently one of the men suddenly stopped talking and claimed that a white cat had jumped on his lap, but James and the other fishermen couldn't see it. Sometimes, Gef would like his life on the farm with the Irving family, catching rabbits for them in exchange for treats like sausages or bananas, and singing along with his favourite songs. However, other times he would become aggressive, throwing stones at Margaret as she walked home, and when James took too long to open his newspaper, Gef would be heard yelling,
"Read it out, you fat-headed gnome."
Upon hearing about the amazing animal, famed paranormal investigator Harry Price decided to investigate. James sent him some hair samples that he claimed were plucked from Gef himself. However, analysis of the hairs found they actually belonged to a dog. When Harry visited the farm, he took some hairs from the family's sheepdog and found they were the same hairs. James also sent some moulds of Gef's paw prints and teeth prints. The front paw prints were apparently a lot larger than the back paw prints and didn't make sense for an animal that was supposed to be the size of a weasel. James explained that Gef's front feet were unusually large and were human-like in appearance. However, the zoological expert who examined the prints said they didn't have the usual texture of skin and that it looked more like someone had made the prints with a stick. Apparently, Margaret took photos of Gef as proof. Gef didn't like the idea of having his photo taken, saying,
"I am a freak. I have hands and I have feet. If you saw me, you'd faint. You'd be petrified, mummified, turned into stone or a pillar of salt."
But he agreed because apparently he would obey the requests of Margaret within limits. Those that looked at the photos couldn't agree if they were genuine or not. Some speculated that they could have been an animal fur, either fox or rabbit, or a stuffed toy made with animal fur and propped up on a fence. Years later, when Valerie was an adult, she was asked if the story was a hoax. She maintains that it was all real and stated, "Yes, there was a little animal who talked and did all those other things. He said he was a mongoose and said we could call him Gef, but I do wish he had left us alone." Valerie claimed that the presence of Gef made her life very hard as she became the victim of bullying because people didn't believe it. She also states that she doesn't know what Gef was, just that he was a small animal that talked. childhood friend of Valerie made the claim that she was a ventriloquist and was throwing her voice, but she stated, "If I was that good, I would jolly well be making money from it now." There were also some who claimed to hear Gef talk when Valerie wasn't around. James also claimed that Gef would sometimes talk to him when he was alone, and all three family members claimed to have seen Gef independently. Arthur Morrison, whose family was friends with the Irving family, went to spend the night at the farm. He later wrote to Harry Price telling him about his experience. This is what he wrote. To start with, during February and beginning of March 1932, I heard a good deal about what was termed at the time as a talking weasel. I ridiculed the whole affair at first. Interest of the people concerned, with amusement in the foreground, I decided to visit Dorish Gashen with the main object of exposing the whole joke, if there was one, on the 7th of March 1932. On my arrival at Mr. Irving's farmhouse, a screeching voice said,
"Hello, Arthur."
To which I replied, "Hello." It then said,
"Call me Gef. I am an earthbound spirit. Before I saw you, I was going to blow your brains out. But I like you now."
Quietness for a few minutes, then loud knocking on the walls in various parts of the house. Suddenly it said,
"Vanished."
All this happened between 5 p.m. and 6 p.m. At about 8 o'clock, Gef reappeared.
"I'm going to keep you awake all night."
"You are not going to keep your promise, I hope." "What have I done to deserve it?" I asked.
"You are a doubter."
In the vicinity of 9 o'clock, while dozing in bed, I heard something moving about underneath and thought it a rat or mouse. Peering underneath the bed, I perceived a pair of piercing eyes. They seemed smaller than a cat's eyes in the dark. An uncanny voice said,
"Now do you believe? Don't you dare upset Jimmo with any skeptical remarks."
at the same time making a spitting noise, Jimmo referring to Mr. Irving. All that night I was kept awake at intervals by animal noises. The next morning I apologized to Mr. Irving for previously disbelieving in the stories of extraordinary manifestations taking place. I positively had all the Irving family at home at the time under observation. There was absolutely no fraud or any deception. Despite all this, Harry Price was convinced that it was a hoax. However, he felt it wasn't a hoax with the intention of making money because all offers of money were refused. It wasn't for fame because the family didn't like that people kept coming to the house and wanted to be left alone. Instead, Harry Price theorized that the family made up the creature purely out of isolation and boredom. However, that theory didn't really work when you consider all the independent witnesses. Then there's the theory that the farmhouse and land itself had an unusual presence about it before the family moved in and before Gef arrived, leading to the idea that it was this presence that made Gef change from a normal mongoose to an extra clever mongoose. When the family was moving in, James hired some men to come and do some work on the house. The men apparently were unnerved by the house and refused to stay overnight. Later in years, when James became sick, Gef apparently disappeared and was never heard from again. Some years later, James would pass away in his bed after being sick for several years. His eldest daughter, Elsie, and his wife Margaret claimed that a branch on the mantel that was used to sweep ash from the fireplace stood up and started moving back and forth in a sweeping motion all by itself. As James passed away, the branch stopped. The two women tried to work out how the branch moved, but couldn't find an answer. Some people believe that the daughter was doing it all, somehow, but Gef seemed to be more closely attached to the father, James. Gef claimed, among other things, to be an earthbound spirit. James believed this to be true, that he was not just a talking animal, and claimed that at one point Gef said to him in a pleading voice,
"Oh, let me go, Jim. Let me go."
When James asked where he wanted to go, Gef said,
"I must go back to the underground."
So James told him to go. James claims that Gef then said,
"Vanished."
and he heard a jumping sound and Gef was gone. So who was Gef? What was he? Was he an animal that gained the gift of speech by some other unforeseen force? Was he really a spirit that James had called up to keep him company? It's plausible that James himself had some kind of psychic or spiritual ability and that he just wasn't aware of it. I personally find this story fascinating. There are a lot more accounts of experiences with Gef by other people. If you find this story as interesting as I do, then I suggest you read up on it. If you like these kind of stories, this one is definitely one you should check out. Anyway, that brings us to the end of this mystery. I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know your thoughts and I'll catch you next week. Bye!